Margaret Calloway leaned toward the microphone at the charity gala podium, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light, and smiled at the 300 guests filling the room. She gestured toward her son's pregnant wife standing near the back wall and said, loud enough for 2 tables to hear clearly, Adrian always had a weakness for rescuing strays. Some habits are harder to break than others. The laughter was polite, practiced, the kind that powerful people use when they want to wound someone without leaving marks. Evelyn Harper stood very still. 6 months of pregnancy weight shifting in heels she shouldn't have worn. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. Across the ballroom, her husband Adrian was laughing at something a rival boss had just said, his back turned, completely unaware that his mother had just reduced his wife to a punchline in front of New York's most dangerous men. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. She smiled and nodded and found her way to the nearest restroom, where she gripped the edge of a marble sink and stared at her own reflection until her breathing slowed. If this story reaches you wherever you are watching, hit that like button right now. Drop your city or country in the comments below because I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next, because the stories we carry here will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Now let's get back to Evelyn, because what happens next changes everything. Well, the night Adrian Calloway first noticed Evelyn Harper, she was arguing with him, not loudly, not dramatically. She was seated across a conference table in the 42nd floor offices of Calloway Capital Group, a legitimate real estate holding company that served as one of several clean money fronts for the Calloway family's less visible operations. Adrian had walked in unannounced, the way men who own buildings tend to do, and found a woman he didn't recognize holding a thick stack of financial disclosure documents and telling his senior legal counsel, Morris Hecht, that 3 of the reported property valuations didn't match the public record assessments by a combined margin of $11 million. Morris Hecht was 62 years old and had survived 4 federal investigations. He was not accustomed to being corrected by a contract analyst who had been in the building for less than a week. The numbers reflect market anticipation, not current assessed value, Morris said, using the smooth, patient voice he reserved for people he planned to fire quietly. Market anticipation isn't a recognized accounting standard under GAAP, she said, not looking up from the page. If these go to disclosure, they'll flag immediately. Adrian stood in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary. He was 38 years old and had spent his entire adult life in rooms where people told him what he wanted to hear. The woman at the table wasn't being difficult, she was being accurate. There was a difference, and he recognized it immediately because accuracy in his world was genuinely rare. He asked Morris to leave them. Morris left without argument, which told Evelyn more about the man in the doorway than anything he could have said about himself. You've been here 4 days, Adrian said, taking the chair across from her. 5, she said, and the discrepancy was in the files I was given on day 2. I flagged it internally before bringing it here. Why bring it here at all? She finally looked up. Because it's my job. And because if I ignored it and it surfaced later, that would reflect on me. He studied her for a moment. She didn't look away, and she didn't perform anything. No nervousness, no flattery, no recalibration of her expression to match whatever she thought he wanted to see. What's your name? He asked. Evelyn Harper. Do you know who I am? You're Adrian Calloway. Your name is on the building. That was all. No deference. No shift in her posture. She closed the document folder and waited, as if she had other things to get back to. He extended her contract by 6 months the following morning. By the 4th month, he was finding reasons to cross paths with her in the building that had nothing to do with business. By the 6th month, he asked her to dinner. She said yes, but only after asking him directly whether this was a professional dinner or a personal one, because she needed to know whether to bring her billing notes. He laughed. He genuinely laughed, the kind that caught him off guard. It was the first time in years that he had laughed at something that wasn't a performance. They were married 11 months after that dinner. A small ceremony, nothing that resembled the Calloway family's usual appetite for spectacle. Evelyn had no interest in spectacle. She wanted a justice of the peace and 2 witnesses and a dinner afterward at a restaurant where the portions were generous and the lighting was imperfect. Adrian had given her exactly that, and had told no one in his organization until after the paperwork was filed. Margaret Calloway had not forgiven him for it. That was the thing Evelyn had not fully understood until it was already too late to navigate. Margaret wasn't simply difficult. She was architectural about her disapproval. She built it room by room, brick by brick, always inside structures that Adrian himself had erected, so that dismantling her required him to admit that something he built was flawed. At the first family dinner Evelyn attended as Adrian's wife, Margaret had asked her, in front of 11 people, whether she planned to continue working or whether marriage had resolved her financial situation. The question was delivered with the warmth of a woman making pleasant small talk. Evelyn had said calmly that she would continue her work because she found it meaningful. Margaret had smiled and said, "Of course you do," in a tone that stripped the answer of everything except its surface. Adrian had said nothing. Evelyn hadn't brought it up until they were home, late, and she had decided that not mentioning it was worse than mentioning it. "She implied I married you for money," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed with her shoes still on. "She implies a lot of things," Adrian said, loosening his tie. "She doesn't mean half of it." "She meant that." He was quiet for a moment. "She'll warm up. She takes time with people." It wasn't a defense of his mother. It wasn't an acknowledgement of what had happened. It was a filing away of the entire conversation under a category called not urgent, and Evelyn recognized the motion clearly enough that she didn't push further. She convinced herself she was being patient. She told herself that marriage was adjustment, that every family had friction at the edges, that the man she had watched laugh at himself in a conference room was still in there beneath the composed and controlled exterior that the Callaway name required him to wear. She found that man in pieces. Sunday mornings, when he made coffee badly and didn't apologize for it. During long drives, when he turned the radio down and asked her questions about her childhood with a curiosity that felt unperformed. During the one night she had a high fever and he sat beside the bed for 4 hours doing paperwork rather than sleeping in the guest room, not because she asked, but because he didn't want her to be alone. Those pieces were real. She held on to them. The pregnancy she discovered on a Tuesday in late October, alone in their master bathroom, staring at a test result with both hands pressed flat against the counter to keep them steady. She was not frightened. The word she returned to afterward was unprepared. Not for the child. For the enormity of what it meant to bring a child into a life that was still, in several important ways, uncertain. She planned the dinner carefully, not elaborately. Evelyn didn't operate in elaborate. She cooked the meal herself, which she rarely did, and set the table with actual candles, which they owned but had never used. She had a specific speech prepared, not a speech exactly, but a sequence of things she wanted to say in the right order so that he understood what she felt before she told him what was true. Adrian arrived home at 12:47 in the morning. She was asleep at the table, her chin on her crossed arms, the candles burned down to waxy stubs on saucers. The food had gone cold 3 hours earlier. He covered her with a throw blanket from the couch and didn't wake her. She told him over breakfast 4 days later, between his first coffee and his first phone call. He put the coffee down and looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, she saw the man from those Sunday mornings. His face opened completely. Then it closed again. "We'll need to move the security rotation," he said, "and the apartment layout might need to change. I'll talk to Marcus about the—" "Adrian," he stopped. "I'm telling you we're having a baby," she said. He reached across the table and took her hand. "I know. I'm sorry." He squeezed her fingers. "I'm glad, Evelyn. I mean that." She looked at his hand on hers and decided to believe him. The Mafia, she had come to understand, was not a dramatic thing in the way outsiders imagined. It was not men in suits shooting at each other in warehouse districts, though she knew that happened. It was meetings. It was phone calls that interrupted everything. It was a permanent low-grade emergency, a system of obligations and debts, and carefully maintained threats that required constant tending, the way a garden requires constant tending, except that the consequences of neglect were measured in bodies rather than dead plants. Adrian ran it with the same precision he brought to everything. He was not cruel, at least not in any way she had directly witnessed. He was efficient. He was loyal to the people inside his circle in a way that she found, occasionally, more painful than useful. Because that loyalty had a hierarchy, and she had never been entirely certain where she ranked. She ranked above his lieutenants. She ranked below his empire. She had always known this in some abstract way. But abstract knowledge and daily lived experience are different animals. And by the 5th month of her pregnancy, the daily lived experience had become impossible to ignore. He missed the first prenatal appointment because of a territory dispute in Queens. He sent flowers, which arrived an hour after she returned home. She put them in a vase and didn't say anything. He missed the second one because of an emergency mediation between 2 affiliated families in New Jersey. He called from the car, his voice carrying the particular quality of a man who is managing several things at once and giving none of them full attention. Everything okay? He asked. She's healthy, Evelyn said. Her heartbeat is strong. She? Evelyn paused. They think it might be a girl. I didn't confirm. I wanted to wait. We'll find out together, he said, and she could hear someone in the background saying something to him in a low voice. I have to go. I'm glad she's healthy. He hung up before she could respond. Margaret, meanwhile, had shifted her approach. The early months of Evelyn's pregnancy had produced a brief, surface-level thaw in Margaret's demeanor. She sent over a food delivery from an expensive restaurant with a note that said, "Eating well is important." But the thaw evaporated quickly. By month 4, the comments had resumed and they had evolved. They were no longer questions about Evelyn's finances or her background. They were observations about Evelyn's fitness for the role she now occupied. At a Sunday dinner in early November, Margaret had watched Evelyn decline a second glass of wine, obviously given the pregnancy, and then said to the table at large, I always believed a Callaway child deserves to enter the world in a household where both parents understand what this family requires of them. The sacrifices. The absolute commitment to the family's position. She looked at Evelyn directly for only a second, long enough to make the target clear, and then looked away. No one at the table said anything. Adrian was talking to his cousin Dominic about something to do with a shipping contract. Evelyn put down her fork. She picked it back up. She finished her food. She smiled at the right moments for the rest of the evening and helped carry plates to the kitchen and said goodbye to everyone with warmth that cost her a considerable amount of energy to produce. In the car on the way home, she stared at the city moving past the window. Your mother implied again tonight that I'm not committed enough to your family, she said. Adrian made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite dismissal. She's anxious about the baby. She does this when she's anxious. She does this when she wants to make a point. Evelyn. His voice carried the particular tiredness of a man who is not dismissing the issue, but has decided this is not the moment for it. I'm just telling you what I observe, she said. I hear you. He did not bring it up again. She went to sleep that night thinking about patience, about how much of it she had extended over the past year, and how it was beginning to feel less like a virtue and more like a withdrawal from a bank account that nobody was replenishing. The baby moved while she lay there in the dark, a slow, rolling pressure that she had begun to recognize as distinct from the other strange new sensations of pregnancy. She pressed her palm flat against the side of her abdomen and felt it again, purposeful, insistent, unmistakably alive. She thought, I will not raise you in a house where your mother is invisible. She didn't know yet exactly what that meant. She didn't know yet what she was capable of. She was 5 months pregnant and exhausted and still, despite everything, holding on to the pieces of the man she had married. The Sunday morning coffee, the 4 hours beside her bed, the laugh that caught him off guard in a conference room 11 months before their wedding. She held on to them. But that night, for the first time, she felt the weight of those pieces and asked herself whether they were enough to carry. She didn't answer the question. She was not ready to answer it. She turned onto her side and pressed her hand against her daughter and closed her eyes and waited for sleep, which came slowly and left before morning. She woke at 5:15 to the sound of Adrian's phone buzzing against the nightstand. He was already awake. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, the particular held-breath tension of a man trying not to disturb someone while simultaneously deciding whether to answer. She kept her eyes closed. The phone buzzed twice more, and then he was moving, sliding out from under the covers with the practiced quiet of someone who had been doing this for years, his feet finding the floor without sound, the bedroom door closing behind him with barely a click. She lay there listening to the silence he left behind. The baby was still. The apartment was that specific pre-dawn quiet that Manhattan produced maybe 2 hours a day when the delivery trucks hadn't started yet, and the bars had finally emptied, and the city briefly resembled something that breathed instead of roared. Evelyn stared at the ceiling and did the calculation she had been doing with increasing frequency over the past several weeks. How many mornings in the last 2 months had she woken up to his side of the bed, already empty? She reached 11 before she stopped counting, because 11 felt like a number that deserved a response she wasn't ready to produce. She heard his voice from the hallway, low and flat and controlled, the voice he used when the matter was serious, and the audience was someone who needed to be managed rather than persuaded. She couldn't make out words. She caught the rhythm, short sentences, pauses while the other person talked, more short sentences. No heat in it. Adrian almost never put heat in his voice during business. Heat was a liability. She pressed her palm to her stomach and felt her daughter shift, slow and deliberate, the way she did in the early morning, as if she were adjusting her position for the day ahead. "I know," Evelyn said quietly, to no one, to both of them. "I know." She was up and dressed before Adrian came back to the bedroom. She was in the kitchen making tea when he appeared in the doorway, already in his shirt and slacks, jacket over one arm, phone in hand, moving with the particular momentum of a man whose day had already started without him. "There's a situation in the Bronx," he said, not as explanation, more as announcement. "There's always a situation somewhere," she said. He looked at her. Something crossed his face, not guilt exactly, more like the awareness of guilt, the shape of it without the weight. "I'll be back by dinner." "You said that Tuesday." "Tuesday was different." She turned back to the kettle. "Okay." He stood there for another moment. She could feel him deciding whether this was a conversation or an exit. He chose the exit. She heard his keys from the bowl by the door, the brief mechanical sound of the apartment locking behind him. And then she was alone again in the kitchen with the morning light coming gray through the windows and her tea steeping too long because she forgot to take the bag out. She sat down at the table and drank it bitter and didn't bother with sugar. The gala was Margaret's idea, which Evelyn should have registered as a warning immediately. Margaret framed it as a charity event, and it was, technically, a fundraiser for a hospital wing that several Callaway-affiliated businessmen had been photographed donating to over the years, the kind of charitable giving that served dual purposes without anyone saying so directly. But Margaret organized the guest list, chose the venue, approved the seating chart. Margaret had been organizing events like this for 30 years, long before Adrian inherited the empire, back when his father was the one whose name made rooms go quiet. She understood exactly what these gatherings were for, and it was not the hospital wing. Evelyn received the invitation, her own household's invitation, which was its own particular message, in a cream envelope slipped under her home office door by the building's concierge. She opened it at her desk between reviewing 2 sets of financial reports she was doing freelance for a law firm in Midtown, the work she had maintained throughout the pregnancy because it was hers, and because maintaining it felt important in a way she couldn't fully explain to Adrian without the explanation becoming an argument about something else entirely. The invitation said formal attire. It said 7 in the evening. It listed Margaret Callaway as host. Evelyn put the envelope on the corner of her desk and looked at it for a long time. She wore the navy dress. Adrian had mentioned the navy dress exactly once, 8 months earlier, when she'd worn it to a dinner with 2 of his associates and their wives, and he'd leaned close as they were leaving and said quietly that she looked breathtaking. She had not forgotten. She chose it deliberately and with full awareness of what she was doing. She was trying to reach something, trying to remind him of a version of them that still existed in her memory even if it had gone quiet in practice. She was 5 months and 3 weeks pregnant. The dress still fit, barely, in the way that dresses fit during pregnancy when the designer never anticipated the circumstances. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror for longer than she usually would and decided not to think about it. Adrian was on the phone when she came out. He looked up and said, without pausing his call, something with his eyes that she chose to interpret as approval. Then he looked back at the middle distance and kept talking. The gala occupied the entire 4th floor of a hotel on Park Avenue that Evelyn had walked past dozens of times without ever entering. Inside it was the architecture of curated wealth. Nothing flashy, everything precise, the kind of tasteful that announced money without discussing it. 300 people in a room where the flowers alone cost more than most apartments in Queens. Evelyn recognized some faces from previous Callaway events. Others she didn't know but understood by posture and positioning, who stood where, who moved toward whom, who waited for others to approach. The grammar of these rooms was its own language, and she had become, over the past year, functional in it, if not fluent. Adrian moved into the room the way he always did in these settings, which was to say, he transformed. Something shifted in his shoulders and his jaw and the quality of his attention, and the man she knew from Sunday mornings and half-finished coffees was replaced by the Adrian Callaway that the room expected, composed, unhurried, with a particular quality of stillness that powerful men cultivate because it makes other people feel the need to fill the silence. She stayed close to him for the first 30 minutes. They spoke to 2 couples she had met before, a man named Ferrante and his wife, and another whose name she could never retain because he had one of those faces that looked like several different faces depending on the angle. She made conversation. She smiled the right amount. She declined champagne and accepted sparkling water and held the glass like a prop. Then Marcus pulled Adrian aside. Marcus Reeves, his second, the man who functioned as the operational center of the family's business. And Adrian gave her the small nod that meant I need to handle something, and she gave him the small nod back that meant I understand, and they separated. She found a position near the far end of the room, not quite against the wall but close to it, with a clear sight line to where Adrian was now speaking with two men she didn't recognize, both of them radiating the particular gravity of men who ran their own organizations. She watched him work. Even now, even after everything, she could acknowledge that he was extraordinary at this, at reading rooms, managing tensions, making people feel both respected and slightly indebted simultaneously. It was a genuine skill, and she had once found it admirable. Now it mostly made her tired. "You look uncomfortable." She turned. Margaret was beside her, materializing the way she always did, smoothly and without warning, dressed in deep burgundy with pearls at her throat. She was 63 years old and looked 10 years younger, which she had achieved through discipline and will and the kind of money that eliminated most of the obstacles between intention and appearance. "I'm fine," Evelyn said. "The dress is ambitious," Margaret said, her eyes moving briefly downward and back up. Evelyn did not respond to that. They stood side by side for a moment, watching the room. There were 3 men within 6 feet of them, all of them in conversation with others, none of them paying direct attention. This was how Margaret operated, always in proximity to an audience, always in a setting where the damage could spread. "You know what I find remarkable about you, Evelyn," Margaret said, her voice carrying the warm, conversational tone she used the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. "Your persistence. I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean that most women would find this life overwhelming, the adjustments required, the understanding that some things come first." She paused. "A Calloway wife needs to understand the hierarchy, not feel entitled to rewrite it." Evelyn kept her eyes on the room, her grip on her water glass tightened by a small, controlled degree. "I'm not trying to rewrite anything." "You attend these events," Margaret continued, as if Evelyn hadn't spoken, "with a kind of expectation. I see it, that you'll be included, that Adrian will perform something for you, that this world will bend toward your comfort." She smiled at someone across the room and raised her glass slightly in greeting. "It doesn't work that way. It never has." Margaret. "I know you don't want me here." Evelyn turned and looked at her directly. "I've known that since the first Sunday dinner. I'm not confused about it." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Margaret's expression. Not surprise. Margaret did not do surprise. More like recalibration, the adjustment of someone who expected deflection and received directness instead. "Then we understand each other," Margaret said. "We understand each other." There was a beat of silence between them, the functional length of time that passes when two people have said what they meant, and there is no softening available. Then Gerald Mace approached them. Gerald Mace was 67 years old, ran a distribution network out of Long Island, and had known the Calloway family since Adrian's father was building the operation. He was one of the men whose opinion carried genuine weight in the room, not just social weight, but operational weight, the kind that affected decisions and alliances. He greeted Margaret warmly, kissed her cheek, turned to Evelyn. "And this must be the wife," he said, with the particular brand of genial condescension that certain older men deploy without any awareness that it lands as condescension at all. "Evelyn Harper Calloway," she said, extending her hand. He shook it. "Beautiful girl Adrian's got. Always wondered what kind of woman would catch him." He looked at her stomach with a nod. "And now a baby. Margaret, you must be thrilled." Margaret set her glass on a passing tray and smiled. "Gerald, you know how it is. Adrian always had a weakness for rescuing strays." She glanced at Evelyn with an expression that was entirely pleasant. "Some habits are harder to break than others." Gerald laughed, a short, uncomplicated laugh. He took it as a joke, the way men like Gerald took most things, as jokes made among friends, the social lubrication of people who had known each other too long to examine what they were actually saying. He moved on after another moment, pulled away by someone else, and Evelyn stood where she was with the water glass in her hand and the room still moving around her. Margaret said nothing more. She drifted after Gerald with the easy confidence of a woman who had just said exactly what she intended to say, in exactly the setting she intended to say it, in front of exactly the people she wanted to hear it, and suffered no consequence for any of it. Evelyn did not look for Adrian. She knew where he was. She knew what she would see. His back to her, engaged, unreachable in the way that she had come to understand as structural rather than personal. He was not ignoring her. He simply had a life in this room that did not require her, and the gap between those two things had been slowly widening for months, and she had been telling herself it was temporary, an adjustment period, a feature of early marriage inside a world this complex. She put her water glass on a tray. She smiled at a woman she didn't know who caught her eye across the room. She spent 40 more minutes in that space, carrying the weight of what had just happened with the same practiced composure she had been developing since her first family dinner, and when Adrian found her near the end of the evening and said, "Ready?" She said yes, and they left, and in the car she stared at the dark city sliding past the window. "Your mother called me a stray," she said. The words sat in the car between them. Adrian's hands were on the wheel. He didn't look at her. "She was talking to Mace," she jokes, "in front of Gerald Mace and whoever else was standing within earshot. She called me a stray that you rescued." "Evelyn, don't say my name like that." A beat. "Like what?" "Like you're managing me. Like this is something to be smoothed over." He exhaled through his nose, which was the sound he made when he had decided a conversation was veering into territory he hadn't budgeted time for. "She makes comments. She's made comments since the beginning. I know it's not. Why don't you stop her?" Silence. "Adrian, why don't you stop her?" He changed lanes. The city continued past the windows, indifferent. "It's complicated with her. You know the history. I know that she has humiliated me at every single family gathering for the past year, and I know that you have never once said anything to her. Not once." "I'll talk to her." "You've said that." "I mean it this time." "You meant it the other times." He turned onto their block and the car slowed, and she felt the terrible, specific frustration of a conversation happening in a moving vehicle, where the endpoint was always the arrival, where the conflict was always interrupted by the geography rather than resolved. "This marriage," he said, and she heard the word marriage with her entire body, heard it carry the weight of whatever was coming after it, was never designed to— "Don't!" He pulled into the garage, cut the engine. "Don't finish that sentence," she said very quietly. He looked at her then. She looked back. In the low light of the parking structure, with the engine cooling and the city muffled outside, she saw him for a moment without the armor the gala had required. Just his face, tired around the eyes, jaw tight with something that was either guilt or resistance, she could no longer tell. "I was going to say," he said more carefully, "that this marriage wasn't designed with the assumption that you would need protecting from my own family." "But I do." He said nothing. "I do need protecting, Adrian. That's what I'm telling you. That's what I've been telling you for 6 months. And every time I tell you, you file it somewhere and close the drawer." She got out of the car without waiting for him to respond. Upstairs, she changed out of the navy dress in the bathroom, with the door closed. She folded it and put it on the shelf and stood in the small amount of space between the vanity and the wall and pressed both hands against her face. Not crying. She was past the point where this produced crying. She was somewhere past that, in the territory where the feeling was too large for tears and had become instead a kind of fullness in the chest, a pressure that didn't release. She heard Adrian come into the bedroom, heard him move around, heard the particular sounds of a man getting ready for bed without discussion. The bathroom sink, the drawers, the creak of the mattress. She stood there for another moment. Then she opened the bathroom door and got into bed and lay in the dark beside him, and neither of them said another word. 3 nights later, Adrian spent the day inside his private office on the 51st floor of a building in Midtown that appeared on no public directory, dealing with a territorial negotiation that had been running for 4 days and still hadn't resolved. Evelyn knew this because Marcus had called the apartment, not Adrian's cell, the apartment, to tell her Adrian would be unavailable until late evening. She had thanked Marcus in the voice she used for Marcus, which was pleasant and professional and revealed nothing. She ate lunch alone. She worked through the afternoon on the financial analysis for the Midtown firm. She sat in the nursery, a room she had been quietly preparing for 2 months, buying things in small increments, not making a project of it because making a project of it felt presumptuous in a way she couldn't entirely explain, and looked at the pale yellow walls she had painted herself on a Saturday when Adrian was in Newark and Rachel had come to help, and they had finished 3/4 of it before realizing they'd bought the wrong finish and spent an hour laughing about it, the good kind of laughing, the kind that didn't require anything. She thought about Rachel. Rachel Donovan had been her closest friend since their 2nd year of college, the kind of friendship that required no maintenance because it had been built on honesty from the beginning. Rachel was a nurse practitioner in Brooklyn, owned a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Carroll Gardens, and had made it clear from the first time she met Adrian that she liked him fine but was reserving final judgment indefinitely. She called it the parole system. She had not yet revoked his parole, but Evelyn knew her well enough to recognize when Rachel was watching something more carefully than she let on. Evelyn called her that evening from the nursery floor, sitting with her back against the wall, her knees drawn up as far as the pregnancy allowed, her phone warm against her ear. "He still hasn't said anything to her," Evelyn said. She had already told Rachel about the gala. She had told Rachel almost everything over the past several months, in pieces, always downplaying it slightly because putting it all together at once felt like an indictment she wasn't ready to file. "Ev, I know." "What do you know? Say it out loud." Evelyn looked at the yellow wall. "I know that it's not going to change." "Do you believe that?" A long pause. Outside, a car alarm went off somewhere below and ran for 30 seconds and stopped. "I don't know what I believe anymore," she said. "I believe he loves me. I think that's real. But I also believe that his mother has been telling him for 30 years that the family comes before everything, and that I'm not the family, not really, and that he can't hear what I'm saying to him through that." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Are you safer there?" "Yes, he's not—" She stopped. "He's not that. He's absent. He's present and absent at the same time. That's its own kind of thing, Ev." "I know." She sat there after she hung up and looked at the room she had built in increments and thought about the weight of increments. Every small humiliation, every dinner where she smiled through something that should have been defended, every morning she woke alone, every phone call that took priority, every negotiation that mattered more, every drawer where her concerns got filed and never reopened. None of those things were large. That was the thing about them. None of them would hold up as an accusation in a court of any kind. They were the texture of a life, accumulated quietly, and their weight was only visible when you looked at how much of yourself you'd spent compensating for them. She got up slowly. Her back ached with the specific persistence of late-term pregnancy. She turned off the nursery light and went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water standing at the sink, looking at the city lights outside. The decision did not arrive fully formed. That was not how decisions like this worked. It arrived the way water finds cracks. Slowly, then everywhere at once. She did not decide that night. She would tell herself later that she decided over several days, but the truth was closer to this. She stopped deciding not to. She started making a mental list. Small things at first. Where her important documents were kept. Which accounts were in her name only. Rachel's address, which she had never needed to memorize before because there had never been a reason to. When Adrian came home that night, late, she was already in bed. He sat on the edge of the mattress and said her name quietly, testing whether she was asleep. She kept her eyes closed and her breathing even. He sat there for a minute, maybe two. Then he got up, and she heard him go to the bathroom, and she lay in the dark with her eyes open and the city humming far below and her daughter still inside her, and she thought, I cannot raise her to disappear. She thought, he has to see what silence costs. She thought, if he will not protect me, I have to protect myself. The following morning, while Adrian was in the shower, she took her laptop from her home office, opened a new browser tab, and typed Rachel's address into a rental inquiry form for a building 2 blocks from her apartment that she had passed once and remembered, the one with the blue door and the decent light, because even now, even in this, she was practical enough to think about light. She didn't submit the form. Not yet. She closed the laptop and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and waited for Adrian to appear. And when he did, she said good morning, and he said good morning back. And they moved through the kitchen with the careful choreography of 2 people sharing a space that had not yet broken, but was holding itself together by a force neither of them was fully willing to name. She submitted the form on a Wednesday. Not impulsively. She had opened and closed it 4 times over 3 days, each time getting a little further into the fields before closing the browser with the particular decisiveness of someone who is not yet ready to be decisive. Name. Email. Desired move-in date. She had filled those in on the 3rd attempt and then sat looking at the cursor blinking in the phone number field for 7 minutes before closing it again. On Wednesday, she filled in the phone number and hit submit before she could reconsider, and then she sat very still in her home office with her hands in her lap and waited to feel something definitive. What she felt instead was a kind of low, spreading calm, the way a fever breaks. Not dramatic, just a temperature returning to something manageable. Rachel answered on the first ring when Evelyn called. I submitted the inquiry, Evelyn said. A beat. For the apartment? Yes. Rachel was quiet for 3 seconds. Okay, what do you need? That was the thing about Rachel. She didn't perform shock or concern. She went immediately to logistics, which was its own form of love. I need to know if the offer still stands, Evelyn said. About staying with you while I sort out the details. Ev, the offer has been standing since March. I just didn't want to say it out loud first. Evelyn pressed her thumbnail against the edge of her desk. I'm not leaving because I've stopped loving him. I know that. I'm leaving because I can't. She stopped, started again. I can't show her that this is what a marriage looks like. I can't let her grow up watching me disappear one dinner at a time. I know, Rachel said again. Her voice was steady and warm and entirely without judgment, the voice of someone who had been watching this happen and had said everything she could say and was now simply present for whatever came next. When? I don't know yet. Soon. I'll make up the second bedroom. Evelyn hung up and looked out the window at the city and thought, soon. She did not tell Adrian. She had thought about telling him, had rehearsed versions of the conversation, the direct version, the careful version, the version where she gave him one clear final statement of what she needed and waited to see if he could hear it. Each rehearsal ended the same way, with his face doing the thing it did, the partial opening followed by the reclosure and the words being filed somewhere, and her standing in the same place she had been standing for months. She was tired of rehearsing for conversations that produced no change. She began moving things quietly. A box of personal documents, her original employment contracts, her degrees, her passport, the birth certificate she had brought from her parents' home in Connecticut when she and Adrian combined their lives, went into her car on a Thursday afternoon while Adrian was at a meeting in Brooklyn. A bag of clothes followed on Friday, the practical ones, not the things she'd bought for Callaway events. She was systematic about it, the way she was systematic about everything, working through a mental list with the focused calm of a woman who has made a decision and is now simply executing it. She told herself it wasn't running. She told herself it was rerouting. The distinction felt important, even if she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. Adrian came home on Friday night with food from the Italian place on 63rd that she liked. The one with the handmade pasta and the sommelier who always insisted on recommending something they didn't order. He set the bags on the kitchen counter and looked almost hopeful, which was its own kind of difficult. The moments when she could see him trying were always harder than the moments when he was simply absent. I thought we could eat together, he said. Okay, she said. They ate at the table. He asked about her work, the freelance case she'd been on, and she told him about it in the abbreviated way she had learned to give information without giving access. He listened, or performed listening. She could no longer always tell the difference. He told her the Bronx situation had resolved. She said that was good. He said Dominic's youngest had gotten into Columbia early decision. She said she was glad. They ate the entire meal without touching anything real. After dinner, he went to his office to make calls. She washed the dishes. She stood at the sink looking at her own hands under the water and thought, this might be the last dinner. And then she dried her hands and went to read in bed and did not cry because there was nothing left in it for tears. She left on a Monday. Adrian was in the shower at 7:15. She had already moved the last things to her car the previous evening while he was out. A small bag, her laptop, the photograph from their wedding, the one informal shot where they were both slightly blurry because the photographer caught them mid-motion and neither of them knew it was happening. The only photograph from that day where they both looked entirely like themselves. She had hesitated over that photograph for 3 full minutes before putting it in the bag. She took it because it was hers, because that moment had been real, whatever had happened since. She left her wedding ring on the nightstand. On his side, not hers. She wanted him to find it, not search for it. She did not leave a note. She had thought about the note extensively and concluded that every version of it was either too much or not enough, and that the ring said what needed to be said. She was 6 months pregnant and walking out the door with her daughter, and the ring was the sentence. Anything she added would only dilute it. She took the elevator down. She walked through the lobby past the concierge, who said good morning in the automatic way of men who say it 40 times a day, and she said good morning back, and the door opened onto the street and the March air hit her face, cold and real and unmediated by marble lobbies or controlled climates or any of the architecture that Adrian's world used to make itself feel inevitable. She got in her car. She sat there for 60 seconds. 60 exactly. She counted them without meaning to. Then she pulled out of the garage and drove toward Brooklyn. She did not look in the rearview mirror. The apartment on the second floor of Rachel's building, the one with the blue door, wouldn't be available for 3 weeks. She stayed in Rachel's second bedroom, which smelled like the lavender fabric softener Rachel had used since college, and was stocked with the particular care of someone who had been quietly preparing. A body pillow for pregnancy sleep, prenatal vitamins on the nightstand, a kettle already full. Evelyn sat on the bed in Rachel's second bedroom and looked at the walls, which were a soft gray and covered with framed photographs of places Rachel had traveled, and felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could accurately track. She felt located, like she was in a place that was actually where she was. She pressed her hand to her stomach. Her daughter moved, that slow morning adjustment, and Evelyn said quietly, "We're okay," which was not entirely true yet, but was not entirely untrue either, and seemed like the right thing to say. Adrian called at 9:47. She watched the phone buzz on the nightstand with his name on the screen. She let it go to voicemail. He called again at 10:12, then at 10:50. Then a gap, longer than the others, and she imagined him in the penthouse, moving through the rooms, understanding the architecture of her departure, the empty half of the closet, the missing photographs, the specific and deliberate absence of the woman who had been disappearing incrementally for months and had now simply finished the process. At 11:36, she received a text. It said, "Tell me where you are. I need to know you're safe." She looked at the message for a long time. She typed, "I'm safe. I'm with Rachel. Please don't come here." He responded in under a minute. "Can we talk?" Not a question. Adrian rarely used punctuation in texts, as if the question mark itself was a concession he wasn't willing to make. She typed, "Not today." She put the phone face down on the nightstand and lay back against the body pillow and stared at the ceiling of Rachel's second bedroom and listened to Brooklyn. Different from Manhattan, lower and more textured, the particular frequency of a neighborhood that had not been fully renovated out of itself. Rachel brought her tea at noon and sat on the edge of the bed and didn't say anything for a while, which was exactly right. "He's going to come," Evelyn said eventually. "Probably. I can't see him yet. I need—" She stopped, trying to locate the exact shape of what she needed. "I need him to sit with it for a little while. The silence. I need him to understand what it costs." Rachel nodded. "I'll handle the door if he shows up." Adrian did not show up that day. He called twice more and she declined both calls. He sent one more text at 9 in the evening that said, "I'm not going to stop trying to reach you. I want you to know that." She read it 3 times. Then she put the phone on the charger and went to sleep. The sleep was deep and long and uninterrupted by buzzing phones or pre-dawn departures, and she woke in the morning to light coming through curtains that were the wrong color for where her body expected to be, and spent 3 disoriented seconds before she remembered, and then felt the disorientation settle into something quieter and more functional. She was still there. That was the thing. She had done it, and she was still there. She was eating breakfast with Rachel 4 days later when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Something made her, a specific quality in the ring, maybe, or the fact that unknown numbers in her life had become rare now that she was no longer embedded in the Calloway network. Evelyn Harper Calloway? The voice was male, formal, and carried the particular precision of someone reading from something. Her stomach tightened. "Speaking," she said. "My name is Daniel Cho. I'm an attorney with Rice and Cho. I've been asked to contact you regarding a matter that affects your legal standing and that of your unborn child. I'd like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience." She set down her fork. Rachel looked up from across the table. "What matter?" Evelyn said. A brief pause. "I'd prefer to discuss specifics in person. What I can tell you is that new information has come to our attention regarding an asset structure associated with Calloway Capital Group, specifically as it pertains to a prenuptial document filed 14 months ago." The word prenuptial landed in the kitchen like a stone hitting still water. "I signed a prenuptial agreement," Evelyn said carefully. "My attorney reviewed it at the time." "Yes," Daniel Cho said. "Your attorney reviewed the document presented to you. However, it appears that document was not the final executed version. There are discrepancies between what you signed and what was filed." The kitchen was very quiet. Rachel had stopped moving entirely. "What kind of discrepancies?" Evelyn said, and her voice was even, steady, the voice she used when something required precision. "The version filed with the court contains a clause regarding asset division in the event of separation that does not appear in the copy given to you at signing. The clause significantly affects your entitlements, including those related to the child. Evelyn's hand tightened around the phone. Are you telling me my prenuptial agreement was altered after I signed it? I'm telling you the documents don't match, Daniel Cho said. And I'm telling you that you should have legal representation before taking any further steps. Are you available Thursday? She said yes. She hung up. She put the phone flat on the table and looked at it. Ev, Rachel said. Someone altered my prenuptial agreement, Evelyn said. Her voice was still steady. She was using all of her available capacity to keep it that way. Between when I signed it and when it was filed. Rachel's face did something complex and went still. Adrian would have had to authorize that, Evelyn said. You don't know. His legal team handled the filing, his attorneys, his family. She stopped. Thought. Margaret Calloway, whose entire project had been to ensure Evelyn did not secure a permanent position inside the family structure. Margaret, who had spent a year building her case brick by quiet brick. His mother. She said it and then sat with it. She thought about the prenuptial signing. Her attorney had been present, a woman named Judith Karras, who had practiced family law for 20 years and who had read every clause aloud and marked the margins in red pen. Judith had called it straightforward, fair. Not generous, but fair. The standard protections, the asset clauses, the provisions for children of the marriage. Judith had not flagged anything because at that moment, nothing was wrong. Whatever was wrong had happened after Judith left the room. Evelyn looked at the breakfast table. Her tea had gone cold. The eggs she'd been eating sat on the plate in a way that no longer made sense to her, as if the appetite that had existed 5 minutes ago belonged to a different woman. I need to find Judith Karras, she said. I'll look her up, Rachel said, already reaching for her own phone. Evelyn stood. Her back ached. She pressed one hand to the base of her spine and breathed through the tightness and stood in Rachel's kitchen with the city outside and the knowledge settling into her like cold water, filling every space it could find. She thought about the year, the dinner table comments, the charity gala, the word stray said in front of Gerald Mace, and whoever else was close enough to hear it, said with the ease of a woman who had no fear of consequence because she had already done the deeper damage in private, in paperwork, in the spaces where Evelyn had trusted that the legal structure of her marriage would protect her if everything else failed. She had trusted it. She had trusted it because she trusted the process, because she had sat with her own attorney and reviewed every page, because she was not naive about contracts or the importance of documentation. She had done everything correctly, and someone had corrected her correctness. She walked to Rachel's living room window and looked out at the street below. A woman pushed a stroller. A man walked a dog that kept stopping. A delivery truck double-parked, and a taxi went around it without much complaint. Judith's office is in Midtown, Rachel said from the kitchen. I have a number. Call it, Evelyn said. Tell them it's urgent. She stood at the window and watched the street and understood that what she had believed was an exit from a painful situation was actually an entry into something more complex and more dangerous than she had anticipated. She had left to protect herself. She had left to protect her daughter. And it appeared that the protection she had relied on had been dismantled, quietly and deliberately, by someone who had seen her leaving, coming long before Evelyn herself had. The question was not whether Margaret had done this. The question was whether Adrian had known. That question was the one she could not yet answer. It sat inside her chest like a coal. Not burning yet, but holding heat, waiting for the right conditions. Waiting for the right conditions. She pressed her hand to her stomach. Her daughter moved, a sharp elbow or knee pushing briefly against her palm. And Evelyn thought, whatever this costs, I will not let it cost you. She thought, I built my case on love and he built his on paper and I need to know which one of them did this to me. She turned from the window. Get me Judith's number, she said, and call the attorney too, this Daniel Cho. Tell him I can do Thursday, but I want to meet in a neutral location. Not his office and not anywhere connected to the Calloway name. Rachel was already dialing. Evelyn went to the second bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and picked up her phone and looked at Adrian's last text, the one that said, I'm not going to stop trying to reach you. She typed one sentence. Did you know about the prenuptial agreement? She hit send and put the phone face down on the nightstand and did not wait to see if he replied quickly or slowly or at all, because the speed of his reply would tell her something, and she was not yet ready for what it might say. She lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling and breathed in and breathed out and thought about everything she had built over 14 months, the trust, the patience, the pieces she had collected and held on to, and felt it restructuring itself inside her, not disappearing, but changing shape, becoming something harder and more angular and considerably more difficult to carry. She had left to be seen. She had not expected to discover that the unseen thing was this. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, face down. She did not turn it over. She breathed. Her daughter pressed against her ribs, persistent and alive, and Evelyn Harper closed her eyes and let the full weight of what she was facing settle into her bones, because she understood that carrying it was the only way through it, and she had never in her life put down something that needed carrying. Adrian replied in 4 minutes. That was the answer, right there, not in the words, but in the time. 4 minutes was not the response time of a man who had to think about whether he knew. 4 minutes was the response time of a man who had just been hit with something he didn't see coming and needed those 4 minutes to absorb the impact before he could form language around it. The text said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Call me." She turned the phone face down again. 4 minutes. She held that number, turned it over, examined it from different angles the way she examined financial documents, not looking for what was there, but for what the structure implied. A guilty man with preparation would have responded faster, with a pre-built denial. A guilty man without preparation would have taken longer, would have needed more time to construct something. 4 minutes was the specific duration of genuine shock working its way toward coherent response. She was not certain. She was not ready to be certain. But 4 minutes meant something, and she filed it in the part of her mind that was still operating like the legal analyst she had been before she became a Callaway wife, the part that had not stopped functioning even when everything else went soft with exhaustion and grief. She picked up the phone and called him. He answered before the first ring finished. Evelyn. His voice was stripped of everything except the immediate. No performance, no management, none of the controlled qualities she had learned to read as armor. What prenuptial agreement? What are you talking about? I got a call from an attorney this morning, she said. He told me the document filed with the court doesn't match the one I signed. There's a clause about asset division that wasn't in my copy, a clause that affects me and the baby. Silence. The specific quality of a silence that is not emptiness but processing. Say that again, he said. She said it again, more slowly, watching her own words the way she watched everything now, measuring each one. Another silence, then, who called you? Give me the name. Daniel Cho. Rice and Cho. She heard him exhale, not in relief. It wasn't that kind of exhale. It was the exhale of a man who has just identified something that requires immediate action and is recalibrating his entire morning around it. I need to make some calls, he said. Adrian. I didn't know about this. I need you to hear that. I hear you saying it. Evelyn. I didn't know. She pressed her thumbnail into her palm, the small controlled pressure she used when she needed to stay inside her own clarity. Then find out who did, she said, and call me back. She hung up. She went back to the kitchen. Rachel had made more tea and was sitting at the table with both hands around her mug, watching Evelyn with the careful attention of someone who is prepared for multiple outcomes. He says he didn't know, Evelyn said. Do you believe him? Evelyn sat down, wrapped her hands around the mug Rachel had already prepared for her. I believe he was genuinely surprised. Whether that's the same as not knowing, she stopped. I need to talk to Judith. Judith Karras called back at 11:40. Her voice carried the specific tension of a professional who has received information that reflects badly on her work, though not on her conduct, and is managing the distinction carefully. I reviewed everything I have from your signing, Judith said. The document I have in my files is the document we discussed. The standard protections. The children's provisions. Nothing unusual. And the filed version? I'm obtaining it now through the county clerk's office. It takes time. How much time? By end of day, hopefully. Evelyn. A pause. If what this attorney is saying is accurate, if the filed document contains clauses that weren't in your signed copy, that's fraud. That's filing a fraudulent legal instrument. That's not a civil matter. The word fraud sat on the kitchen table between Evelyn and Rachel like something physical. I know what it is, Evelyn said. Do you have any idea who would have had access to the document between signing and filing? Evelyn looked at Rachel. I have a very clear idea, she said. She spent the rest of the morning in Rachel's second bedroom, working through her own copies of every document related to the prenuptial process. The initial draft, the negotiation correspondence, the markup from Judith's red pen, the signature page. She laid them out on the bed in sequence and went through them with the focused attention of someone who had spent a decade finding discrepancies in financial structures. At 12:15, Adrian called back. "I talked to Morris," he said. Morris Hecht, his senior legal counsel, the same man Evelyn had corrected in the conference room on her 5th day of work, what felt now like a different century. The filing was handled by his office. He's saying the document he filed matched what he received for filing. Which means somewhere between your signature and his desk, it changed, Evelyn said. Yes. Who had access? A beat. Morris is looking at the chain of custody. He thinks... Adrian stopped. She heard him move, heard a door close, the particular acoustic shift of a man removing himself from earshot of whoever was nearby. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. He thinks it came from inside the family, not his team. Someone with access before it reached his team. Evelyn pressed her hand flat against the bed among her documents. Her heart was doing something measured and deliberate, not panicking, but marking time with a weight that she felt in her throat. Your mother manages family documents, she said. I know. She's organized every legal instrument related to the family for 30 years. Your father gave her that role and you kept it. I know, Evelyn. So you know what I'm telling you. The silence on the line was different from his earlier silences. This one had a texture, a grained, resistant quality, the silence of a man pressing up against a conclusion he can see clearly and has not yet allowed himself to reach. I need to talk to her, he said. Yes, Evelyn said. You do. She waited. The line stayed open, but neither of them spoke for a moment that stretched longer than was comfortable. I'm sorry, he said. It came out rough and unprepared, the way genuine things come out of people who are not accustomed to saying them. I know it's not sufficient, but I am. Talk to your mother, she said, and call me when you know. She hung up and lay back on the bed among her documents and stared at the ceiling and breathed. Adrian went to Margaret's apartment on 5th Avenue at 2 in the afternoon. He had not called ahead. He had the key she'd given him 15 years ago, the spare, the one she'd pressed into his hand after his father's funeral with the quiet message that this is yours now, all of it, every obligation and every piece of what was built. He used it and let himself in and found her in the sitting room with a book and a glass of water and the particular composed stillness of a woman who had no reason to expect disruption. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. Adrian. Her voice carried the warm, modulated surprise of a woman managing her expression. I wasn't expecting the prenuptial agreement, he said. He didn't sit down. He stood in the doorway of the sitting room with his coat still on and his hands at his sides, and the particular quality of attention he brought to situations that required absolute precision. The one filed with the court after Evelyn and I signed. Tell me about the discrepancy. Margaret's composure did not crack. That was the thing about her. She had spent 63 years building the surface, and the surface was formidable. She set her book down and folded her hands in her lap. I don't know what you mean. Don't. Adrian, don't. The word came out flat and final. Not raised, not theatrical. The voice he used when a conversation was over before it began, when a threshold had already been crossed and what remained was only the accounting. I've spent 2 hours on the phone with Morris. I have the chain of custody. The document went through the family archive before it reached his desk. You managed the family archive. A pause. Margaret looked at him with the steady eyes of a woman who has prepared for this and is deciding which preparation to deploy. I did what was necessary, she said. The room went absolutely still. Adrian's jaw tightened. A muscle moved in his cheek, just once, the sole visible sign of something happening below the surface that had no safe outlet. You altered a legal document, he said, after my wife signed it. You altered the terms of her legal protection and filed a fraudulent instrument with the court. I protected this family. From what? From a woman who was going to take half of what 3 generations built the moment your marriage became inconvenient for her. Margaret's composure was intact, but something underneath it had shifted. Her voice had taken on a quality of conviction, the tone of a person who has not just done a thing but believed in the doing of it. I know women like her, Adrian, intelligent, strategic, with their documents and their attorneys and their... She is my wife. She is a contract analyst who saw an opportunity and... Stop. He took one step into the room. Just one. His voice dropped further, which was worse than raising it. You have spent the last 14 months deliberately dismantling my marriage. The comments, the dinners, the gala, and now this. Margaret lifted her chin. I made sure this family's assets were protected. You made sure she couldn't leave without losing everything. He looked at his mother, really looked at her, with the dispassionate clarity of a man seeing a thing clearly for the first time, precisely because he spent too long refusing to look. Including provisions for the child, our daughter. You altered the protections for my unborn child. Something moved across Margaret's face then. Not guilt. It wasn't shaped like guilt. Something more like the recalculation of a woman who had anticipated most responses and had not fully modeled this one. The child is a Calloway, she said. The child will always be— Get out of the family business, Adrian said. Margaret blinked. Every account you have access to, every document archive, every decision-making role I've allowed you to hold, it's done. As of today. He said it the way he said everything in rooms like this, with the absolute calm of a man who has already decided and is simply announcing the outcome. I'll have Morris send the formal documentation. Adrian. For the first time, a crack in the composure. Not emotional, more structural, the sound of load-bearing material being stressed. You cannot do this over a woman who just walked out of your home with her bag packed before you. Over a woman, he said, who I failed to protect for 14 months while I was too busy protecting everything else, and who I am going to spend whatever time she gives me trying to make right. He picked up his keys from the table where he'd set them. You'll still receive your allowance. You'll still have the apartment, but you're done inside this family's operations, done at the dinners, done at the events. He paused at the door. If you contest this, I'll turn over the document chain to the DA's office myself. We clear? Margaret said nothing. He left. He sat in his car outside her building for 3 minutes with both hands on the steering wheel and his eyes on the street and his chest doing something that had nothing to do with the empire he ran and everything to do with the specific grief of being absolutely certain, for the first time, that you have let someone down in a way that may not be recoverable. Then he called Evelyn. She answered on the third ring. It was her, he said. She confirmed it. Evelyn said nothing. He heard her breathing, even, controlled. I've removed her from all family operations. Formal documentation today. She won't contest it. A pause. I'm going to have Morris file a corrected document with the court. The original, your signed version. And I want to pay Judith's fees for however long this takes to resolve legally. Adrian, I know this doesn't— He stopped. Tried again. I know that fixing the document doesn't fix anything else. No, she said. It doesn't. Can I see you? The question hung there. He heard Brooklyn through the phone, distant, textured, a different frequency than what he was used to. I need a few days, she said. Okay. I'm not— She paused, and he heard her working towards something honest with the same deliberateness she brought to everything. I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need a few days to think with a clear head about what I actually want, because I've been thinking through fog for months, and I need the fog to lift. Okay, he said again. It was insufficient as a word, and he knew it and said it anyway because there was nothing larger that fit. I'll be here. She hung up. He drove back to the penthouse. He walked through the apartment slowly, room by room, with his coat still on, and saw it the way she must have seen it. The specific quality of a space that has been arranged around one person's life until the other person's presence becomes ambient, architectural, useful but not central. He saw it clearly, finally, without the daily momentum of the empire blurring the edges. He stood in the nursery doorway for a long time. She had painted the walls yellow. He hadn't noticed when she'd done it. He had come home one afternoon and the room had changed, and he'd said something about it, he thought, something vague and approving, and then his phone had rung and he'd answered it and moved on. Yellow walls, a small dresser with the drawers not yet filled, a rocking chair in the corner that still had the price tag looped around one leg. He walked to the rocking chair and took off the price tag and set it on the dresser. Then he sat down in the chair, which was too small for him, and sat there in the yellow room in his coat with his hands in his lap. His phone rang. Marcus, with something about the Bronx situation resurfacing. He stared at the name on the screen. Let it ring. Let it go to voicemail for the first time in as long as he could clearly remember. The room was quiet. He sat in it. He was still sitting there 40 minutes later when his phone rang again. Not Marcus this time. The number was one he recognized as belonging to the medical group that handled Evelyn's prenatal care. He stared at it. It stopped ringing. Then a voicemail notification appeared. He opened it. A nurse's voice, professional and calm. This message is for Mr. Calloway. We have you listed as an emergency contact for Evelyn Calloway. She's asked us to let you know she's been admitted to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. Some elevated blood pressure readings we want to monitor. She's stable and the baby is fine. She wanted you informed. She did not request that you come, but she wanted you to know. Adrian was out of the rocking chair before the message finished. He was in his car before the voicemail notification finished processing. He drove to Brooklyn with both hands on the wheel and the specific controlled urgency of a man who has spent his life managing crises in rooms where showing fear is a liability, who is now in a situation where fear is the only honest response and who no longer has any interest in being dishonest. He parked badly. He knew it and didn't care. I was through the hospital's main entrance and at the front desk before he'd made any conscious decision to run, and then he was running, and the desk clerk was calling after him about checking in, and he turned back and stood at the desk, breathing hard through his nose, and said his wife's name and the room number. And she was stable. He knew she was stable. The voicemail had said stable, but stable is a word that only means so much, and his daughter was in that room and his wife was in that room, and he had spent 14 months treating the most important things in his life as secondary emergencies. The clerk gave him the room number. He took the stairs. He stopped outside room 318 with his hand on the doorframe. Through the narrow window in the door, he could see Rachel sitting in the chair beside the bed, and Evelyn propped up against the pillow with a blood pressure cuff on her arm and a monitor attached to her abdomen, and the specific expression of a woman who is maintaining composure because composure is what the situation requires. She looked tired, more tired than he had seen her, but her eyes were open and sharp, and she was talking to Rachel about something, and the monitor beside her showed a heartbeat, steady, rapid, the particular quickness of a very small heart working hard. He pushed open the door. Both women looked up. Rachel's face went through several things quickly. Evelyn's face went through fewer things more slowly. "The message said you didn't want me here," he said from the doorway. "The message said I didn't request you," she said. "That's different." He stepped inside and let the door close behind him. He looked at the monitor, at the readout, at the number on the blood pressure cuff display. "Are you?" "I'm fine. Blood pressure spiked this morning. Probably stress." She watched him. He was still in his coat, he realized, still in the coat from Margaret's apartment, hadn't taken it off since he left the penthouse in the car. "They want to keep me overnight for observation." "Okay," he said. He pulled the chair from the other side of the room without asking and sat down on her other side, the side Rachel wasn't occupying, and Rachel looked at Evelyn and Evelyn gave the smallest possible nod, and Rachel stood. "I'm going to find terrible coffee," Rachel said, in the voice she used when she was giving people room. She left. The room was quiet except for the monitor. Adrian looked at the screen showing his daughter's heartbeat. He looked at it for a long time. "I sat in the rocking chair," he said. Evelyn looked at him. "In the nursery. I sat in it for, I don't know, a long time." He kept his eyes on the monitor. "You left the price tag on it." "I kept forgetting to take it off." "I took it off." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, and he wasn't sure he deserved to. "Adrian?" "I know." He finally looked at her. He looked at her the way he should have been looking at her for months. Not managing the look, not filing it under not urgent, but just looking, with everything he actually felt visible in it, because there was no longer any strategic reason to keep it hidden and no personal strength left to do so. "I know what I've done, what I haven't done. I know the difference." Her eyes were steady. She was still the most accurate person he had ever met. "What happens now," she said, "cannot be because you're scared." "I know. It has to be because you've actually decided what matters, not in a hospital room, not because the monitor is on and I'm in a bed and it's all urgent and immediate." Her voice was even and exhausted and entirely precise. "Because you've thought about what your life looks like without us in it and made a real choice about what you want it to be." He held her gaze. He did not look away. "I have thought about it," he said. "I've thought about nothing else since I walked into the penthouse and your ring was on the nightstand." His voice cracked, not dramatically, just at the hinge of one word, the specific sound of a man whose composure has been load-bearing for too long. "I don't want to run an empire that she grows up afraid of. I don't want to be the man who let her mother disappear one dinner at a time. I don't want—" He stopped, pressed his mouth together. "I want to be in the room, Evelyn, not managing what happens from a distance, actually in the room." The monitor kept its rhythm, steady, insistent. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. He let her look. "One night," she said finally. "You can stay for tonight while they observe." And tomorrow we talk about what actually comes next. Not in a hospital, not in a crisis, but as two people making a real decision. Yes, he said. He took off his coat. He folded it over the back of the chair. He sat down and turned toward the monitor and watched the small, rapid certainty of his daughter's heartbeat moving across the screen. And he did not pick up his phone. And he did not take a call. And he did not file anything under not urgent. He sat in the room. For the first time, he simply sat in the room and let everything that mattered be exactly where it was. They kept her until noon the following day. The blood pressure, stabilized by midnight, settled into something the attending physician described as acceptable, which was not the same as good but was sufficient to stop the particular edge in the room from getting sharper. Evelyn slept in intervals, the specific broken sleep of a hospital bed in the third trimester, waking to the cuff, tightening on her arm every 2 hours. The nurse with the quiet shoes checking the monitor, the particular ambient sound of a building that never fully darkened. Adrian slept in the chair. Not well. He shifted and woke and shifted again, his coat draped over his shoulders because the room ran cold, and he hadn't thought to ask for a blanket and didn't want to call the nurse for something that felt, in the context of the evening, trivial. Around 3 in the morning, he was awake, and Evelyn was awake, and they didn't say anything for a while, both of them looking at the monitor, at the steady line of their daughter's heartbeat crossing the screen in its small, insistent rhythm. "She moves more at night," Evelyn said finally. "Does it hurt?" "Not hurt, it's pressure. And sometimes she gets into a position that makes it hard to breathe for a minute." A pause. "Then she moves again." He watched the monitor. "What does it feel like when she moves?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment, and he thought she might not answer, and then she said, "Like being reminded. Like something tapping you on the shoulder and saying, 'I'm still here. I'm still coming.'" He looked at his hands in his lap. In the dark hospital room with the city outside the window doing its 3 in the morning version of his psalm, he felt the full accumulated weight of everything he had not done and had not said and had not prioritized, and he let himself feel it without trying to manage it into something more bearable, because managing it was what had gotten them here. "I didn't know about the document," he said. "I want you to know that I know it doesn't matter whether you believe me right now, but I need to say it clearly, without it being part of a negotiation or an argument. I didn't know." "I know you didn't," she said. He looked up. 4 minutes, she said. "You called back in 4 minutes. A man who knew would have had an answer ready." She shifted against the pillow. "I'm not saying that makes everything else different, but I know you didn't know." He exhaled. "Okay." "It still happened," she said. "In your house. Under your name. Inside the legal structure that was supposed to protect me. Whether or not you knew, it happened." "Yes." "So the question isn't whether you meant for it to happen. The question is what kind of man you decide to be now that it has." He sat with that. The monitor kept its rhythm. Outside, a cart moved down the hallway, wheels squeaking irregularly against the floor. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said, about the kind of life she grows up seeing." He looked at the monitor. "I don't want her to see a man who runs the room but abandons the people in it. I've watched that. I know what it produces." He paused. "My father was very good at his work." Evelyn looked at him. "I was very good at his work," Adrian said again, quietly. "And my mother became what she became, and I spent 20 years learning from both of them without examining what I was learning." He pressed his thumb against his palm. "I don't want to hand Charlotte a version of what they handed me." The name sat between them in the quiet room. Charlotte. They had not discussed it officially, had circled it without landing, but it had been the name Evelyn kept returning to privately, the name that felt right in a way she couldn't defend analytically and didn't need to. "Charlotte," Evelyn said. "If that's—" "Yes," she said. "That's right." They were quiet together for a while after that, and it was a different quality of quiet than the silences that had accumulated between them over the past months. Those had been the quiet of avoidance, of things not being said because saying them required a confrontation neither of them had fully prepared for. This was quieter in its substance. More settled, not resolved. Nothing was resolved at 3 in the morning in a hospital room with a blood pressure monitor and a rocking chair price tag on a dresser somewhere in a Manhattan apartment they hadn't decided the future of yet. But present. Both of them present in the same space in a way they hadn't managed in a very long time. Rachel arrived at 8 with coffee and a breakfast sandwich for herself and the specific fruit and yogurt combination she knew Evelyn would tolerate in the morning during the pregnancy, which she produced from a paper bag with the efficiency of a woman who had planned this before leaving her apartment. She looked at Adrian in the chair, at Evelyn in the bed, at the room in general, and said nothing except, "Good morning," in a tone that was not warm exactly, but was not hostile, which from Rachel represented a significant recalibration. The discharge paperwork took until noon. Evelyn signed things, and the nurse reviewed the monitoring instructions, and the attending physician said elevated readings were common in late-stage pregnancy under stress, and gave a list of symptoms to watch for, and said to follow up with her OB within 48 hours. Evelyn said she would. She meant it. Adrian brought the car around. Rachel walked out with Evelyn, one hand loosely at her elbow on the uneven sidewalk, and when they reached the car, Rachel stopped. "I'm going to get a cab," Rachel said. Evelyn looked at her. "Call me when you're settled," Rachel said. She looked at Evelyn with the direct, uncomplicated steadiness of a woman who has been someone's person for 20 years and knows exactly what her role is and what it isn't. "Whatever you decide, call me." She hugged Evelyn carefully, with the particular gentleness of someone accommodating a body that had changed shape, and then she stepped back and hailed a cab on the corner with the confidence of someone who had been navigating Brooklyn long enough to do it without thinking. Evelyn got in the car. Adrian didn't ask where to go. He drove toward Brooklyn, toward Rachel's Street, the route he had learned from the hospital visit, and Evelyn sat in the passenger seat and watched the city and said nothing until they were 3 blocks from Rachel's building. "Don't stop here," she said. He glanced at her. "Keep driving," she said. He kept driving. Through Carroll Gardens, across the bridge, back into Manhattan, through the particular midday density of the city going about its business. She watched it and said nothing for a long time, and he drove without asking, without filling the silence, which was its own thing, the ability to be in a car with someone and not perform. "I need to tell you something," she said when they were moving up the west side. "Okay. I'm not coming back because things are fixed. I want to be clear about that. Things are not fixed. The prenuptial situation is still a legal matter, and Judith is still going to pursue whatever needs pursuing, and that's separate from us. And your mother, what she did to me, the year of it, the document, that's going to take time. I don't know how much. I'm not promising a timeline. I'm not asking for one. I need you to understand what coming back means. It means dinners where you're present, appointments where you show up, conversations where you actually hear what I'm saying and don't file it somewhere." She turned to look at him. "It means that when something is happening to me inside your family, you deal with it. Not later, not when it's convenient, when it's happening." "Yes," he said. "It means Charlotte sees a father who is in the room." "Yes. And if any of that changes, if we get back into the apartment and the old patterns reassert because the crisis has passed and it stops feeling urgent, I will leave again, and the next time I won't be asking for a few days." He kept his eyes on the road. "I know. I need you to say it like you know what it means." He pulled over. Not at a destination, just pulled over, found a legal spot near Riverside Drive, and cut the engine and turned to look at her fully. His face was tired in the way that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with reckoning. "I know what it means," he said. "I know what it costs. I've been sitting with what it costs since I found your ring on the nightstand, and I am going to keep sitting with it, because sitting with it is what I should have been doing for the last 14 months, instead of filing it away." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you to trust me today. I'm asking you to let me show you over time whether I'm capable of being what I should have been." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that a bus passed behind him and a jogger went by on the path and the city continued, indifferent and enormous, around their stopped car. "Okay," she said. They drove home. The legal resolution took 11 weeks. Judith Karras obtained the filed document through the court clerk's office and confirmed the discrepancy within 48 hours of receiving it, a clause on page 7 that had not appeared in Evelyn's signed copy, inserted cleanly between existing paragraphs in a way that suggested familiarity with the document's structure and access to the editable source file. The clause significantly reduced Evelyn's asset entitlements in a separation scenario and contained language around the child's domicile that was, in Judith's assessment, designed to create leverage rather than provide protection. Morris Hecht, to his credit and perhaps out of self-preservation, cooperated fully with the internal investigation. The chain of custody was clear. The document had moved through the family archive, which Margaret managed before reaching his desk. Margaret's assistant, a woman named Caroline who had worked for her for 9 years, provided a statement confirming that Margaret had requested the editable file under the pretense of reviewing formatting consistency. Caroline had not known what the review entailed. She said so plainly, and it was believed. Adrian delivered the original signed document to the court with a formal statement from Morris regarding the filing discrepancy. He provided Judith with everything she requested and did not attempt to manage the scope of the investigation or protect the family's name from the implications. He told Marcus, his second, that the matter was to be handled with full transparency and that anyone who attempted to minimize it for optics reasons would answer to him directly. Marcus said, "Understood," in the tone he used when he understood both the instruction and the subtext beneath it. Margaret did not contest anything. She received the formal documentation from Morris's office on a Thursday morning and did not respond to it, did not call Adrian, did not reach out to Evelyn. She retreated into the Fifth Avenue apartment with the particular dignity of a woman who has been outmaneuvered and intends to process the fact privately rather than publicly. Whether she felt remorse was not something Evelyn spent significant time wondering about. Remorse from Margaret Calloway would arrive, if it arrived at all, in its own form on its own timeline, and Evelyn had learned enough about her own capacity for waiting to know that she was not going to organize her recovery around someone else's emotional schedule. What mattered, legally, was that the corrected document was filed. What mattered personally was more complicated and took longer. She moved back into the penthouse 3 weeks after the hospital stay. Not dramatically, there was no announcement, no ritual. Rachel helped her move the boxes from the second bedroom, which took one car trip and a shared lunch afterward at the diner on Smith Street, where Rachel always ordered the same thing, and the coffee was reliably bad and neither of them cared. They ate and talked about Rachel's work, and a man Rachel had gone on 2 dates with, and something funny that had happened on the subway that morning, and Evelyn felt, sitting across from her in the diner with the early spring light coming through the window, the specific gratitude of having a friendship that could hold everything. The weight of the crisis and then the ordinary weight of the day after the crisis, both at the same table, no transition required. "You sure?" Rachel said when the check came. "I'm not sure of anything," Evelyn said, "but I'm going back." "That's different from sure." "I know. It's all I've got." Rachel nodded. She did not offer the particular brand of reassurance that would have required Evelyn to feel more certain than she did. That was why the friendship had lasted 20 years. The penthouse was different when she walked back in. She noticed it immediately. Not dramatically different, the furniture was the same, the layout was the same, but there were small things. The flowers on the entry table were the kind she preferred, not the formal arrangements the florist usually sent, but grocery store flowers, tulips, slightly imperfect, the kind that someone buys because they're trying to do a thing correctly rather than impressively. The kitchen table had been set, not formally. 2 plates, 2 glasses, bread from the bakery. 2 blocks away that she'd mentioned once, months ago, in passing. Adrian was in the kitchen when she came in with her bag. He was making something that required attention, which meant he didn't hear her immediately, and she stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment watching him. Watching this man who ran the most feared criminal organization in the city, standing at the stove with a dish towel over his shoulder, slightly uncertain about whatever was in the pan. He heard her. He turned. He looked at her for a moment without saying anything. "I made pasta," he said. "It might be overcooked." "Okay," she said. "I also have bread. And there's—" He opened the refrigerator briefly and closed it. "I wasn't sure what you were in the mood for, so I got several things, and none of them go together particularly well." "That's fine." He looked at her standing in the doorway with her bag. She looked at him with the dish towel on his shoulder. The city was present outside the windows in the usual way, continuous, indifferent, enormous. "Welcome home," he said, quietly, without performance. She set her bag down. She went into the kitchen and looked at what was in the pan, which was in fact slightly overcooked, but not irretrievably so. And she found the olive oil in the cabinet where it had always been and added some and adjusted the heat. And he stood beside her and watched and did not tell her she was doing it wrong, even though she was aware he had opinions about olive oil temperature. They ate at the kitchen table. The bread was good. The pasta was fine. They talked about practical things, the spare room situation, the OB follow-up that was scheduled for Tuesday, the crib that still needed to be assembled in the nursery, the question of whether the rocking chair was positioned correctly relative to the window. He asked her about the rocking chair placement with a seriousness that made her look up. "I moved it," he said, "while you were at Rachel's. I thought the angle to the window was wrong for nighttime feeding, but I wasn't sure what you'd planned." She looked at him. He had moved the rocking chair in a room that she had built alone on a Saturday when he was in Newark, a room he had walked past for 2 months without giving it his full attention. "You thought about nighttime feeding," she said. "I've been thinking about a lot of things I wasn't thinking about before." She looked down at her plate. "The angle is probably better where you moved it," she said. "Okay." They did the dishes together. That was new, or not new exactly, but consistent in a way it hadn't been before. The willingness to occupy the same domestic space without one of them deferring to the other's departure. He washed and she dried, and the kitchen had the particular warm smell of garlic and olive oil and bread. And outside the city went on being the city. The Tuesday appointment was the first prenatal visit Adrian attended where he was not catching up to something he had already missed. He was there early. She arrived to find him in the waiting room of the OB's office on the Upper East Side, sitting in one of the upholstered chairs with his hands in his lap and his phone in his pocket, which she noted because his phone was never in his pocket in waiting rooms. It was always in his hand. He stood when she came in. "You're early," she said. "I left time for traffic." "You never leave time for traffic." "I'm trying new things." She sat down beside him and they waited together in the quiet of the waiting room, which had the particular ambient sound of a medical office, the distant murmur of the receptionist, the soft track of inoffensive music, the faint percussion of other people's ordinary days proceeding around them. The doctor was Dr. Anita Vasquez, whom Evelyn had been seeing since the 8th week, a direct and unhurried woman in her 50s who had the specific quality of someone who had seen enough to know what mattered and what didn't. She noted Adrian's presence with a brief, neutral nod and proceeded with the examination with professional thoroughness, blood pressure, measurements. The Doppler pressed to Evelyn's abdomen for the heartbeat. The heartbeat filled the room, rapid and clear and entirely indifferent to the complexities of the people listening to it. Adrian's expression changed. Evelyn watched it change from the table, watched the thing that happened in his face when he heard it, not the managed response of a man performing emotion in an appropriate moment, but the unmanaged response of a man who had not been prepared for how real it would sound and was now dealing with that reality directly. His jaw tightened, his eyes stayed on the monitor. He pressed his lips together once, briefly. "Strong," Dr. Vasquez said, moving the Doppler slightly. "Consistent rate, good rhythm. She's doing well." "She," Adrian said. He had known for weeks, but hearing the doctor say it in the clinical, matter-of-fact way of medical confirmation was its own thing. "She," Dr. Vasquez confirmed. Evelyn watched him. I was still looking at the monitor with the expression of a man experiencing something he had no category for, no preparation for, no management strategy for, because there was no management strategy for the sound of your daughter's heartbeat at 30 weeks in a room where you had finally decided to simply be present. He reached across without looking away from the monitor and found Evelyn's hand on the table. She let him take it. The weeks after that were not easy. She had not promised easy. Easy was not the shape of what they were building, which was something more like functional and honest and incrementally real, built on the understanding that the distance they'd accumulated didn't disappear because they decided to stop adding to it. There were dinners where he left his phone on the counter. Sometimes she noticed and said nothing. Sometimes she noticed and said something and he didn't get defensive, which was more significant than the gesture itself. The willingness to be corrected without it becoming a negotiation about who was right. There were evenings where he sat in the nursery while she folded the small clothes she'd started washing and putting away, the onesies and the hats and the particular impracticality of newborn socks. And he asked her what she needed from him, and she told him honestly, and he wrote it down, literally, in the notes app on his phone, which she found both slightly absurd and entirely serious. There were nights where she woke at 2 a.m. with the particular restlessness of the final weeks and found him awake already, lying in the dark. And she asked him once what he was thinking about, and he said, without particular drama, "Whether I'm going to be good at this." And she had looked at the ceiling and thought about it honestly and said, "I don't know yet, but I think you're asking the right question now, which is different from before." He said, "Yeah." That was all. That was enough for 2 a.m. The conversation with Margaret happened on a Saturday in April, 5 weeks before the due date, and it was not something Evelyn planned or engineered. Margaret called the apartment, the landline, which almost no one used, and Evelyn answered because Adrian was in the shower and the ringing was persistent. "Evelyn." Margaret's voice was different, not warm. Margaret Calloway's voice was not going to become warm. That was not the nature of the woman, and Evelyn had long ago stopped expecting it. But the quality that had always underlain it, The sharp directional quality of a woman using her voice as a precision instrument was absent. What remained was something flatter and more plainly human. "Margaret," Evelyn said. A pause. "I would like to speak with Adrian. He'll be out in a few minutes. I can have him call you." Another pause, longer. "How are you feeling?" Evelyn stood at the kitchen counter with the phone in her hand and understood that the question, offered in that stripped-down tone, was the closest thing to an overture that Margaret Calloway was structurally capable of producing. It was not an apology. Evelyn did not mistake it for one. But it was contact, direct and unmediated, from a woman who had spent 14 months treating her as an obstacle and had arrived, through whatever private process of reckoning, at the position of asking how she was feeling. "Better," Evelyn said. "The blood pressure situation is managed." "Good." Another pause. "The child, she's healthy, growing well." "Good," Margaret said again. Her voice on the second good had a different quality than it had on the first. They were silent for a moment on the phone, two women with the full and complicated history of what had happened between them present in the line. "I'm not going to tell you I was wrong," Margaret said finally. "You know what I believed. I believed this family needed to be protected. I still believe that. I know you do. What I did with the document, a pause that took longer than the others, that was outside what I should have done, even by my own standards." Evelyn said nothing. She waited. "I'm telling you that," Margaret said, "because you deserve to hear it directly, not because I expect it to change anything." "It doesn't change anything," Evelyn said. "But I heard it." When Adrian came out of the shower, she handed him the phone and went to sit in the nursery, in the rocking chair at its new angle to the window, and listened to the half of his conversation she could faintly hear through the wall. Short, controlled, the voice he used with her now, no warmth but no war either. The particular tone of a man managing a boundary he has set and intends to hold. She rocked slowly and looked at the yellow walls and thought about what it cost to be inside a family like this one, and what it produced, and whether the thing it produced was worth the cost. She did not arrive at a clean answer. Clean answers had never been available in this particular situation, and she had stopped looking for them somewhere around the 3rd month of pregnancy when she realized that looking for clean answers was itself a kind of avoidance. Charlotte Evelyn Calloway was born on a Thursday morning in early May. The labor lasted 14 hours and was not heroic. It was exhausting and physical, and at several points Evelyn said things she would not have said in a room that wasn't a delivery room, and Rachel, who was there because Evelyn had asked her to be and Adrian had not objected, held her hand on one side and said the particular things that Rachel said in difficult situations, which were not comforting platitudes but were straightforwardly true things stated with calm. "You're doing it. It's happening. You're still here." Adrian was on her other side. He did not try to manage the situation. He did not offer solutions or logistics. He held her hand, and when she squeezed it hard enough to make him wince, he did not mention it. When she told him at hour 9 to stop saying "almost there," because they had no idea if they were almost there, he stopped saying it and said nothing instead, which was correct. At 6:47 in the morning, Charlotte arrived. She was red-faced and outraged and announced herself with a cry that had a specific indignant quality, as if she had opinions about the transition and intended to register them. The nurse put her on Evelyn's chest, and Evelyn put both hands around her and felt the specific weight of her, small and damp and searingly alive, with her fists clenched and her eyes squeezed shut, and her entire small body radiating the effort of existing. Evelyn pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head. She didn't say anything. There wasn't language for it. She just held her and felt her breathing, the rapid, shallow breath of a newborn, and matched it with her own. She heard Adrian beside her and looked up. He was undone. That was the only accurate word for it. The architecture that he maintained so consistently, the composure that had defined him in every room she had ever seen him occupy, was simply gone. His face was open in a way she had seen only in fragments before, in the conference room when he laughed without expecting to, in the hospital room at 3 in the morning, in the moments when the armor had come down briefly before going back up. But this was not a fragment. This was the whole of him, present and cracked open and making no effort to close. He was crying. Quietly, without drama, the tears of a man who had not planned for the experience of this moment, because no one can actually plan for it. "Come here," Evelyn said. He leaned in and she shifted Charlotte slightly, and he put one careful finger against their daughter's cheek, Just one, with the particular tentative care of a man who runs organizations and moves through the world with absolute certainty and has just encountered the one thing that renders certainty irrelevant. Charlotte turned her face toward the touch, the instinctive ancient reflex. She turned toward his finger and her mouth moved in the searching way of newborns, and Adrian made a sound that was not quite a word and was not quite a sob and was somewhere in between. "She knows you," Evelyn said, which was not technically accurate, and which she said anyway because it was the truest thing she had available. They stayed like that. The nurse moved around them, doing the necessary things, and Rachel stood near the wall with her hands pressed to her own mouth, and the room had the particular light of an early May morning, pale and just arrived, coming through the window at the low angle of a sun that had recently returned to the world. Evelyn looked at her daughter's face. She thought about the year, all of it, the conference table where she'd told a man his numbers were wrong, the Sunday mornings, and the badly made coffee. The dinners where she'd smiled through things that should have been defended. The navy dress in the bathroom, the ring on the nightstand, the Brooklyn apartment and Rachel's lavender fabric softener, the hospital room and the blood pressure cuff, and the heartbeat on the monitor, the prenuptial document and the chain of custody, and Margaret's voice on the phone saying that was outside what I should have done. She thought about what it cost to stay inside a hard thing long enough for it to become something different, not easier, not clean, different. She thought about what she had needed to become to do it. Not softer, not more forgiving in the abstract sense, but more precise about what mattered and more willing to demand it at the cost of comfort. She thought about the woman she had been in the conference room on day 5, the one who told the truth because it was her job, and because she had standards for her own accuracy that didn't bend for the convenience of the room. She had not lost that woman. She had misplaced her for a while in the effort of accommodation, in the work of patience that had sometimes functioned as self-erasure. But she was still there. The woman who told men their numbers were wrong. The woman who left. The woman who came back on her own terms. She was still entirely, precisely herself. Charlotte made a sound, not a cry, something smaller, a complaint, a commentary. And Evelyn adjusted her hold and the sound stopped. "She has opinions," Rachel said from near the wall. "Yes," Evelyn said. "She does." Adrian was still leaning close, still with his finger against Charlotte's cheek, and Evelyn looked at him and he looked at her. And it was not a look that resolved anything, because resolution was not available as a single transaction. It was a look that acknowledged the full weight of what had happened and what it had cost, and what was being built now from the material that remained, which was flawed and uneven and entirely real. The months that followed were not a transformation story. That was the thing about real life inside complicated situations. It did not transform cleanly. It adjusted. It renegotiated. It built new structures out of old materials, and the old materials had their own shapes, and those shapes were not always convenient. Adrian restructured his relationship with the empire, not by leaving it. That was not a story available to him, and Evelyn had never asked for it, having understood from before the wedding what she was marrying into, but by changing the architecture of his presence inside his own household. He appointed a deputy for operational decisions below a certain threshold, which meant Marcus now made choices that Adrian would previously have reserved for himself, which cost Adrian a degree of control that she understood had cost him genuinely. He was home for dinner more nights than he wasn't. When he wasn't, he called. When he called, he was present for the call, not managing multiple things, not giving her the half attention of a man with too many open threads. He asked about her day with the kind of specificity that required him to remember what the previous day had contained, which meant he was listening to what she told him rather than processing it as ambient noise. He learned how Charlotte liked to be held for sleep, on his chest, tilted slightly left, with one hand between her shoulder blades and the other supporting her weight from below. He learned this by trial and error across 3 consecutive nights of walking the apartment with her at 2 a.m. while Evelyn slept, learning the specific choreography of a particular person's comfort, which was the kind of knowledge that could not be delegated. He learned to ask Evelyn when something happened inside the family's social structure, an event, an obligation, an encounter with the extended network that their life required, whether she was all right with it, not as a formality, as a genuine question that expected a genuine answer and would receive one. She told him the truth when he asked. She had always been constitutionally suited to the truth. The adjustment was in trusting that the truth would be received. Sometimes it was received imperfectly. He would miss something, or default to the efficiency mode, when the moment required something slower, or field a phone call at a bad moment and manage it badly. And she would tell him, with the directness she had always had, what had happened and what it had cost. And he would not get defensive, and they would move through it. And the moving through it was itself a thing. The willingness to be corrected and stay in the room, the willingness to correct and stay in the room, the choosing to work within the same structure rather than around it. It was not romantic, exactly. Or it was romantic in a way that had nothing to do with gestures and everything to do with sustained attention, which was harder and less visible and considerably more valuable. There was one evening, 6 weeks after Charlotte came home, when Evelyn was standing at the nursery window watching the last of the daylight drop out of the sky over the city, and she heard Adrian's voice from the room behind her, low and unhurried, the particular tone he used only when he was talking to Charlotte, which was softer and more tentative than any other voice she had heard from him. She did not turn around. She stood at the window and listened. He was telling Charlotte about the city, not performing a story, just describing what was outside, the way you describe something to someone when you want them to know about the world they've arrived in. The bridges and the water and the way the light fell in the early evening across the buildings on the east side. He wasn't a poetic man, and the descriptions were not poetic. They were just specific and honest, and offered without any expectation that the newborn in his arms understood a word of it. He was talking to her because he wanted to, because she was there, and he was there, and the impulse to tell her things had simply arrived in him without strategic calculation. Evelyn stood at the window and felt the city below her and the room behind her and her daughter's voice, or not her voice yet, her presence, her breathing audible in the small sounds she made when her father talked, and she understood something that she had not known how to name before. She had not stayed because she'd forgiven everything. She had not come back because the love had survived intact. She had stayed because she had made a decision about what she was capable of building and what she required in order to build it, and she had extracted those requirements from the situation with the same precision she brought to everything, and she was holding Adrian to them with the same consistency, and he was, imperfectly, effortfully, genuinely, meeting them. That was not a small thing. In the world she had lived in for the past 2 years, in the life adjacent to power and fear and the permanent emergency of his empire, genuine effort was not common. People around Adrian Calloway did what they did because they were afraid, or because they were loyal to an arrangement, or because the cost of not doing it was higher than the cost of doing it. What he was doing now had none of those structures. There was no arrangement requiring him to learn how Charlotte liked to be held. There was no loyalty obligation requiring him to leave his phone on the counter. There was nothing compelling him except the decision he had made in a hospital room at 3 a.m. and had been honoring since. She turned from the window. He was in the rocking chair at its adjusted angle to the window, Charlotte against his chest, his large hand spanning the whole of her small back. He looked up when Evelyn turned. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the ottoman beside the chair. She reached out and put her hand over his on Charlotte's back. His hand was warm. Charlotte breathed. "What were you telling her?" Evelyn said. "About the bridges," he said. "She can't see the bridges yet. Her range of focus is only about a foot." "I know." He looked down at Charlotte, then back up at Evelyn. "I'm getting the information in early." Evelyn looked at him. He looked back at her. His eyes were tired from the 2 a.m. nights, and the ongoing weight of everything he carried, and the unfamiliar exhaustion of being more fully present than he had been trained to be. But they were clear. Clear in the way that eyes are when a person has stopped managing what shows in them and allowed the actual thing to be visible. She did not say that she loved him. That was not where they were yet, in the easy language of it, the words offered without the full weight of their implications. Maybe they would get there again. Maybe that version of them was still available on the other side of the work they were doing. She kept her hand over his. Charlotte breathed between them, small and entirely certain of her right to be there. In the yellow room on a May evening with the city running its usual enormous life outside the window. The feared king of New York's underworld sat in a rocking chair too small for him with his daughter on his chest and his wife's hand on his. And outside the city did what cities do, which is continue, indifferent to the small and significant things happening in the rooms it contains. And Evelyn Harper, not Evelyn Calloway for the sake of anyone's name, not Evelyn anyone's wife for the sake of a structure, but Evelyn Harper who told men their numbers were wrong and left when she needed to and came back on her own terms, sat beside the man she had chosen and the daughter she was raising, and did not look away, and did not disappear, and held her own hand steady over the thing she had decided was worth staying for. That was all. That was the whole of it. The city went on,